Hello and welcome back. I'm trying to get a good angle here so you can see my face. I guess that'll work. It's not as pretty as I was trying though. I have it's a lovely day today, and I have all this lovely greenery behind me. But that's just ambiance. It'll work out. Hope you've had a great week. I hope you have your tea or coffee or assorted happy beverage. I never have asked, what are your favorite beverages when you're just relaxing? Are you a tea person, a coffee person, or something else entirely? Just because I'm curious, and it's fun. So, I am having a beautiful day, which is why we're outside. Sorry about the lighting quality, it is what it is. The sun just kind of does its thing. And so we're outside, and it's happy. I've had a lovely week. We had the 4th of July here, which was kind of fun. Nothing super exciting or different, just doing fireworks and hanging out with people that are good and eating yummy food. No updates on Sunseeker for you. No, I think this is pretty much the main thing I've got going right now. I do have great plans for Sunseeker. This chapter is not finishing itself off well though, so I have to tweak it a little bit. Anyways, the reason we're here. Hey Ava. Not much is up. Ceiling, clouds. There was an airplane. So we'll be reading, what we're here for today though is we are reading Howl's Moving Castle. We're continuing with that. If you've seen the movie, Ava, it's pretty awesome. Oh, making chicken nuggets. That's delicious. That sounds yummy. I'm hungry. I haven't decided what dinner is here yet. So where we're at in the story, the book is very different from the movie, is what I was saying, if you've seen the movie. Where we're at with Howl's Moving Castle is, let's see, Howl has just been commissioned to find the lost prince, and so he's decided he's going to move the castle and all the doors to it. However, before he does that, he has to go to the funeral of dear Mrs. Penstemon, who's the one who taught him all about magic. So we are in chapter 15, in which Howl goes to a funeral in disguise. Oh, also Sophie has made friends with a new dog man who is a cursed person who takes the shape of a dog, and every time he tries to turn back into a human, he's pulled back into dog form, and he turns into a different type of dog every single time. So he came and jumped into the castle and said he's there to protect her and that he's in love with her sister, and he promised he'd look out for Sophie. So that's all we know about him thus far, other than that he's a very confused man who looks like a dog. So, here we go. The dog man curled up heavily on Sophie's toes when she went back to her sewing. Perhaps he was hoping she would manage to lift the spell if he stayed close to her. When a big, red-bearded man burst into the room carrying a box of things and shed his velvet cloak to become Michael, still carrying a box of things, the dog man rose up and wagged his tail. He let Michael pat him and rub his ears. "I hope he stays," Michael said. "I've always wanted a dog." Howl heard Michael's voice. Howl's sick in bed as well, I forgot to tell you. And he's a miserable sick person. He mopes and whines and carries on because he's dying. Howl arrived downstairs wrapped in the brown patchwork cover off his bed. Sophie stopped sewing and took a careful grip on the dog, but the dog was courteous to Howl, too. He did not object when Howl fetched a hand out of the coverlet and patted him. Well, Howl croaked, dispersing clouds of dust as he conjured some more tissues. I got everything, said Michael, and there's a real piece of luck, Howl. There's an empty shop for sale down in Market Chipping. It used to be a hat shop. Do you think we could move the castle there? Howl sat on a tall stool like a robed Roman senator and considered. It depends on how much it costs, he said. I'm quite tempted to move to the Port Haven entrance there. That won't be easy because it will mean moving Calcifer. Port Haven is where Calcifer actually is. What do you say, Calcifer? It will take a very careful operation to move me, Calcifer said. He had become several shades paler at the thought. I think you should leave me where I am. So, Fanny is selling the hat shop, Sophie thought, as the other three went on discussing the move. And so much for the conscience Hal said he had. But the main thing on her mind was the puzzling behavior of the dog. In spite of Sophie telling him many times that she could not take the spell off him, he did not seem to want to leave. He did not want to bite Howl. He let Michael take him for a run on Port Haven marshes that night and the following morning. His aim seemed to become part of the household. Though if I were you, I'd be in Market Folding, making sure to catch Letty on the Though if I were you, I'd be in Market Folding, upper folding, making sure to catch Letty on the rebounds, Sophie told him. Howl was in and out of bed all the next day. When he was in bed, Michael had to tear up and down the stairs. When he was up, Michael had to race about, measuring the castle with him and fixing metal brackets to every single corner. In between, Howl kept appearing, robed in his quilt and clouds of dust, to ask questions and make announcements, mostly for Sophie's benefit. Sophie, since you whitewashed over all the marks we made when we invented the castle, perhaps you can tell me where the marks in Michael's room were? No, Sophie said, sewing in her 70th blue triangle. I can't. Howl sneezed sadly and retired. Shortly, he emerged again. Sophie, if we were to take that hat shop, what would we sell? Sophie found she had had enough of hats to last a lifetime. Not hats, she said. You can buy the shop, but not the business, you know. Apply your fiendish mind to the matter, said Howl, or even think if you know how. And he marched away again upstairs. 5 minutes later, down he came again. Sophie, have you any preference about the other entrances? Where would you like us to live? Sophie instantly found her mind going to Mrs. Fairfax's house. I'd like a nice house with lots of flowers, she said. I see, croaked Howl, and marched away again. Next time he appeared, he was dressed. That made 3 times that day, and Sophie thought nothing of it until Howl put on the velvet cloak Michael had used and became a pale, coughing, red-bearded man with a large red handkerchief held to his nose. She realized Howl was going out then. You'll make your cold worse, she said. I shall die, and then you'll all be sorry, the red-bearded man said, and went out through the door with the knob green down. For an hour after that, Michael had time to work on his spell. Sophie got as far as her 84th blue triangle. Then the red-bearded man was back again. He shed the velvet cloak and became Howl, coughing harder than before, and, if that was possible, more sorry for himself than ever. Hi, Autumn. Hi, Winona. I took the shop, he told Michael. It's got a useful shed at the back and a house at the side, and I took the lot. I'm not sure what I shall pay for it all with, though. What about the money you get if you find Prince Justin? Michael said. You forgot, croaked Howl. The whole object of this operation is not to look for Prince Justin. We are going to vanish. And he went coughing upstairs to bed, where he shortly began shaking the beams sneezing for attention again. Michael had to leave the spell and rush upstairs. Sophie might have gone, except the dog man got in the way when she tried. This was another part of his odd behavior. He did not like Sophie to do anything for Howl. Sophie felt this was fairly reasonable. She began on her 85th triangle. Michael came cheerfully down and worked on his spell again. He was so happy that he was joining in Calcifer's saucepan song and chatting to the skull just as Sophie did while he worked. "We're going to live in Market Chipping," he told the skull. "I can go and see my Letty every day." "Is that why you told Howl about the shop?" Sophie asked, threading her needle. By this time she was on her 89th triangle. "Yes," Michael said happily. "Letty told me about it when we were wondering how we'd ever see one another again. I told her—" He was interrupted by Howl, trailing downstairs in his quilt again. "This is positively my last appearance," Howl croaked. "I forgot to say that Mrs. Penstemon is being buried tomorrow on her estate near Porthaven, and I shall need this suit cleaned." He brought the gray and scarlet suit out from inside. He brought the gray and scarlet suit out from inside his coverlet and dropped it on Sophie's lap. "You're attending to the wrong suit," he told Sophie. "This is the one I like, but I haven't the energy to clean it myself." "You don't need to go to the funeral, do you?" Michael said anxiously. I like this story. It's pretty good. You can read the previous chapters on YouTube. So you can start at chapter 4. I don't think I have chapter 1 and 2. Maybe it's chapter 3. I know I don't have chapters 1 and 2 up because I forgot to move them over. Where was I? Oh. "You don't need to go to the funeral, do you?" Michael said anxiously. "I wouldn't dream of staying away," said Howl. "Mrs. Penstemon made me the wizard I am. I have to pay my respects." "But your cold is worse," said Michael. "He's made it worse," said Sophie, "by getting up and chasing around." Howl at once put on his noblest expression. "I'll be all right," he croaked, "as long as I keep out of the sea wind. It's a bitter place, the Penstemon estate. The trees are all bent sideways, and there's no shelter for miles." Sophie knew he was just playing for sympathy. She snorted. "And what about the witch?" Michael asked. Howl coughed piteously. "I shall go in disguise, probably as another corpse." He trailed back toward the stairs. "Then you need a winding sheet and not this suit," Sophie called after him. Howl trailed away upstairs without answering, and Sophie did not protest. She now had the charmed suit in her hands, and it was too good a chance to miss. A corpse. He thinks he's dying because he has a cold. She took up her scissors and hacked the gray and scarlet suit into 7 jagged pieces. That ought to discourage Howl from wearing it. Then she got to work on the last triangle of the blue and silver suit, mostly little fragments from round the neck. Oh, last triangles, plural. Now it was very small indeed. It looked as if it might be a size too small, even for Mrs. Penstemon's page boy. "Michael," she said, "hurry up with that spell. It's urgent." "I won't be long now," Michael said. Half an hour later, he checked things off on his list and said he thought he was ready. He came over to Sophie carrying a tiny bowl with a very small amount of green powder in the bottom. "Where do you want it?" "Here," Sophie said, snipping off the last threads. She pushed the sleeping dogman aside and laid the child-sized suit carefully on the floor. Michael, quite as carefully, tipped the bowl of sprinkled powder on every inch of it. Then they waited, rather anxiously. A moment passed. Michael sighed with relief. The suit was gently spreading out larger. They watched it spread and spread until one side of it piled up against the dog man, and Sophie had to pull it further away to give it room. After about 5 minutes, they both agreed the suit looked Howl's size again. Michael gathered it up and carefully shook the excess powder off it into the grate. Calcifer flared and snarled. The dogman jumped in his sleep. "Watch it," said Calcifer. "That was strong." Sophie took the suit and hobbled upstairs on tiptoe with it. Howl was asleep on his gray pillows, with his spiders busily making new webs around him. He looked noble and sad in his sleep. Sophie hobbled to put the blue and silver suit out on the old chest by the window, trying to tell herself that the suit had gotten no larger since she'd picked it up. "Still, if it stops you going to the funeral, that's no loss," she murmured, as she took a look out the window. The sun was low across the neat garden. A large, dark man was out there, enthusiastically throwing a red ball toward Howl's nephew, Neil, who was standing with a look of patient suffering, holding a bat. Sophie could see the man was Neil's father. "Snooping again," Howl said, suddenly behind her. Howl said suddenly, behind her, blah blah blah. Sophie swung round guiltily to find that Howl was only half awake, really. He may even have thought it was the day before, because he said, "Teach me to keep off envy's stinging. That's all part of past years now. I love Wales, but it doesn't love me." Where'd it go? "Megan's full of envy because she's respectable and I'm not." Then he woke up a little more and asked, "What are you doing?" "Just putting out your suit for you," Sophie said, and hobbled hastily away. I know, wouldn't a moving castle be delightful? So this castle has a special door with a knob above it that has 4 sides, and it has a different color on each side, right? And so you turn the knob, and then you open the door below, and it takes you to one place, and then you close the door, you turn the knob to a different color, and you open it, and it takes you to a totally different place. Excuse me. It's a delightful castle. I love it. Ah, my coffee's attacking. Howl must have gone back to sleep. He did not emerge again that night. There was no sign of him stirring when Sophie and Michael got up next morning. They were careful not to disturb him. Neither of them felt that going to Mrs. Penstemmon's funeral was a good idea. Michael crept out on the hills to take the dogman for a run. Sophie tiptoed about, getting breakfast, hoping Howl would oversleep. There was still no sound of Howl when Michael came back. The dogman was starving hungry. Sophie and Michael were hunting in the closet for things a dog could eat when they heard Howl coming slowly downstairs. "Sophie," Howl's voice said accusingly. He was standing, holding the door to the stairs open with an arm that was entirely hidden inside an immense blue and silver sleeve. His feet, on the bottom stair, were standing inside the top half of a gigantic blue and silver jacket. Howl's other arm did not come anywhere near the other huge sleeve. Sophie could see that arm in outline, making bulging gestures under a vast frill of collar. Behind Howl, the stairs were full of blue and silver suit, trailing back all the way to his bedroom. "Oh dear," said Michael. "Howl, it was my fault. Your fault? Garbage," said Howl. "I can detect Sophie's hand a mile off. And there are several miles of this suit. Sophie dear, where is my other suit?" Sophie hurriedly fetched the pieces of the gray and scarlet suit out from the broom cupboard, where she had hidden them. Howl surveyed them. "Well, that's something," he said. "I'd been expecting it to be too small to see." Give it here, all 7 of it. Sophie held the bundle of gray and scarlet cloth out toward him. Howl, with a bit of searching, succeeded in finding his hand inside the multiple folds of blue and silver sleeve, and, working it through a gap between 2 tremendous stitches, he grabbed the bundle off her. I am now, he said, going to get ready for the funeral. Please, both of you, refrain from doing anything whatsoever while I do. I can tell Sophie is in top form at the moment, and I want this room the usual size when I come back to it. He set off with dignity to the bathroom, wading in blue and silver suit. The rest of the blue and silver suit followed him, dragging step by step down the stairs and rustling across the floor. By the time Howl was in the bathroom, most of the jacket was on the ground floor and the trousers were appearing on the stairs. Howl half shut the bathroom door and seemed to go on hauling the suit in hand over hand. Sophie and Michael and the dogman stood and watched yard after yard of blue and silver fabric proceed across the floor, decorated with an occasional silver button the size of a millstone and enormous, regular rope-like stitches. There may have been nearly a mile of it. I don't think I got that spell quite right, Michael said, when the last huge scalloped edge had disappeared round the bathroom door. And didn't he let you know it, said Calcifer. Another log, please. Michael gave Calcifer a log. Sophie fed the dogman. But neither of them dared do anything much else except stand around eating bread and honey for breakfast until Howl came out of the bathroom. He came forth 2 hours later out of a steam of verbena-scented spells. He was all in black. His suit was black, his boots were black, and his hair was black too, the same blue raven black as Miss Angorian's. His earring was a long jet pendant. Sophie wondered if the black hair was in honor of Mrs. Penstemon. She agreed with Mrs. Penstemon that black hair suited Howl. His green glass eyes went better with it, but she wondered very much which suit the black one really was. Howl conjured himself a black tissue and blew his nose on it. The window rattled. He picked up one of the slices of bread and honey from the bench and beckoned the dogman. The dogman looked dubious. I only want you where I can look at you, Howl croaked. His cold was still bad. Come here, Pooch. As the dog crawled reluctantly into the middle of the room, Howl added, You won't find my other suit in the bathroom, Mrs. Snoop. You're not getting your hands on any of my clothes again. Sophie stopped tiptoeing toward the bathroom and watched Howl walk around the dogman, eating bread and honey and blowing his nose by turns. What do you think of this as a disguise? He said. He flicked the black tissue at Calcifer and started to fall forward onto hands and knees. Almost as he started to move, he was gone. By the time he touched the floor, he was a curly red setter, just like the dogman. The dogman was taken completely by surprise, and his instincts got the better of him. His hackles came up, his ears lowered, and he growled. Howl played up, or else he felt the same. The 2 identical dogs walked round one another, glaring, growling, bristling, and getting ready to fight. Sophie caught the tail of the one she thought was the dogman. Michael grabbed for the one he thought was Howl. Howl rather hastily turned himself back. Sophie found a tall, black person standing up in front of her and let go of the back of Howl's jacket. The dogman sat down on Michael's feet, staring tragically. Good, said Howl. If I can deceive another dog, I can fool everyone else. No one at the funeral is going to notice a stray dog lifting its leg against the gravestones. He went to the door and turned the knob blue down. Wait a moment, said Sophie. If you're going to the funeral as a red setter, why take all the trouble of getting yourself up in black? Howl lifted his chin and looked noble. Respect to Mrs. Penstemon, he said, opening the door. She liked one to think of all the details. He went out into the street of Port Haven. Alright. I am going to pause real quick so I can go get my dinner started, and then I will read one more chapter. So I'll be right back. Cocoa Melon. Hi, Nonies. What song is that you were just singing, typing? I don't know that I know that one. I Forgot I'm Having Dinner. Your New Boyfriend by Wilbur Soot. I'll have to look that one up. Thank you. I forgot I'm having dinner with my mama. So, I didn't have to get anything done. Wahaha. Alright, one more chapter and then we will call it good for the night. Chapter 16, in which there is a great deal of witchcraft. Several hours passed. The dog man was hungry again. Michael and Sophie decided to have lunch too. Sophie approached Calcifer with the frying pan. Why can't you have bread and cheese for once? Ooh, chocolate chip pancakes. Chocolate chip pancakes with chicken nuggets? That is a very interesting mix. All the same, Calcifer bent his head. Sophie was just putting the pan on top of the curly green flames when Howl's voice rang out hoarsely from nowhere. Brace yourself, Calcifer. She's found me. Calcifer sprang upright. The frying pan fell across Sophie's knees. You'll have to wait, Calcifer roared, flaming blindingly up the chimney. Almost at once he blurred into a dozen or so burning blue faces, as if he was being shaken violently about and burned with a loud, throaty whirring. That must mean they're fighting, Michael whispered. Sophie sucked a slightly burnt finger and picked up slices of bacon off her skirt with the other hand, staring at Calcifer. He was whipping from side to side of the fireplace. His blurred faces pulsed from deep blue to sky blue, and then almost to white. One moment he had multiple orange eyes, the next rows of starry silver ones. She had never imagined anything like it. Something swept overhead with a blast and a boom which shook everything in the room. A second something followed with a long, shrill roar. Calcifer pulsed nearly blue-black, and Sophie's skin fizzed with the backblast from the magic. Michael scrambled for the window. They're quite near. Sophie hobbled to the window too. The storm of magic seemed to have affected half the things in the room. The skull was yattering its jaw so hard that it was traveling round in circles. Packets were jumping, powder was seething in jars. A book dropped heavily out of the shelves and lay open on the floor, fanning its pages back and forth. At one end of the room, scented steam boiled out of the bathroom. At the other, Howl's guitar made out-of-tune twangings, and Calcifer whipped about harder than ever. Michael put the skull in the sink to stop it from yattering itself onto the floor while he opened the window and craned out. Whatever was happening was maddeningly just out of sight. People in the houses opposite were at doors and windows pointing to something more or less overhead. Sophie and Michael ran to the broom cupboard, where they seized a velvet cloak each and flung them on. Sophie got the one that turned its wearer into a red-bearded man. She knew why Calcifer had laughed at her in the other one. Michael was a horse. But there was no time to laugh just then. Sophie dragged the door open and sped into the street, followed by the dog-man, who seemed surprisingly calm about the whole thing. As the wind whirled round, I take a breath for victory. Wanna play tag or wave your white flag? 'Cause you'll never touch me. King of hearts all in. It's a sin to want to win. Can't see me flying like a bee. Black and yellow energy. Only me on my team, naturally. Interesting. Michael trotted after her with a clatter of non-existent hooves, leaving Calcifer whipping from blue to white behind them. The street was full of people looking upward. No one had time to notice things like horses coming out of houses. Sophie and Michael looked too, and found a huge cloud boiling and twisting just above the chimney tops. It was black and rotating on itself violently. White flashes that were not quite like light stabbed through the murk of it, but almost as soon as Michael and Sophie arrived, the clot of magic took on the shape of a misty bundle of fighting snakes. Then it tore in two with a noise like an enormous catfight. One part sped yowling across the roofs and out to sea, and the second went screaming after it. Some people retreated indoors then. Sophie and Michael joined the rush of braver people down the sloping lanes to the dockside. There everyone seemed to think the best view was to be had along the curve of the harbor wall. Sophie hobbled to get out along it too, but there was no need to go beyond the shelter of the harbor master's hut. Two clouds were hanging in the air, some way out to sea, on the other side of the harbor wall. The only two clouds in the calm blue sky. It was quite easy to see them. It was equally easy to see the dark patch of storm raging on the sea below the clouds, flinging up great white-topped waves. There was an unfortunate ship caught in that storm. Its masts were beating back and forth. You're okay. I'm enjoying the song lyrics. They're fun. They could see spouts of water hitting it on all sides. The crew were desperately trying to take in the sails, but one at least had torn to flying gray rags. "Can't they have a care for that ship?" someone said indignantly. Then the wind and the waves from the storm hit the harbor wall. White water lashed over and the brave persons out on the wall came crowding hurriedly back to the quayside, where the moored ships were heaving and grinding at their moorings. Among all of this was a great deal of screaming and high singing voices. Sophie put her face out into the wind beyond the hut, where the screaming came from, and discovered that the raging magic had disturbed more than the sea and the wretched ship. That does not seem appropriate, Long Tour, so... let's just not. We have kids on this channel. Please be appropriate. A number of wet, slithery-looking ladies with flying green-brown hair were dragging themselves up onto the harbor wall, screaming and holding long wet arms out over more screaming ladies tossed in the waves. Every one of them had a fishtail instead of legs. "Confound it," said Sophie, "they're mermaids from the curse." That meant only two more impossible things to come true now. She looked up at the two clouds. Howl was kneeling on the left-hand one, much larger and nearer than she would have expected. He was still dressed in black. Typically enough, he was staring over his shoulder at the frantic mermaids. He was not looking at them as if he remembered they were part of the curse at all. "Keep your mind on the witch," the horse beside Sophie yelled. The witch sprang into being, standing on the right-hand cloud, in a whirl of flame-colored robe and streaming red hair. With her arms raised to invoke another magic. As Howl turned and looked at her, her arms came down. Howl's cloud erupted into a fountain of rose-colored flame. Heat from it swept across the harbor, and the stones of the walls steamed. "It's all right," gasped the horse. Howl was on the tossing, nearly sinking ship below. He was a tiny black figure now, leaning against the bucking mainmast. He let the witch know she had missed by waving at her cheekily. The witch saw him the instant he waved. Cloud, witch, and all at once became a savagely swooping red bird diving at the ship. The ship vanished. The mermaids sang a doleful scream. There was nothing but sulkily tossing water where the ship had been. But the diving bird was going too fast to stop. It plunged into the sea with a huge splash. Everyone on the quayside cheered. "I knew that wasn't a real ship, really," someone behind Sophie said. "Yes, it must have been an illusion," the horse said wisely. "It was too small." As proof that the ship had been much nearer than it looked, the waves from the splash reached the harbor wall before Michael had stopped speaking. A 20-foot green hill of water rode smoothly sideways across it, sweeping the screaming mermaids into the harbor, rolling every moored ship violently sideways, and thudding in swirls round the harbor master's hut. An arm came out of the side of the horse and hauled Sophie back toward the quay. Sophie gasped and stumbled in knee-high gray water. The dog-man bounded beside them, soaked to the ears. They had just reached the quay, and the boats in the harbor had all just rolled upright, when a second mountain of water rolled over the harbor wall. Out of its smooth side burst a monster. It was a long, black-clawed thing, half cat, half sea lion, and it came racing down the wall toward the quay. Winona keeps stealing your phone. I'm not shocked. Another burst out of the wave as it smashed into the harbor, long and low too, but scalier, and came racing after the first monster. Everyone realized that the fight was not over yet, and splashed backward hurriedly against the sheds and houses on the quayside. Sophie fell over a rope and then a doorstep. The arm came out of the horse and dragged her upright as the two monsters streaked past in a scatter of salt water. Another wave swirled over the harbor wall, and two more monsters burst out of that. They were identical to the first two, except the scaly one was closer to the cat-like one. And the next rolling wave brought two more, closer together yet. "What's going on?" Sophie squawked as this third pair raced past, shaking the stones of the jetty as they ran. "Illusions," Michael's voice said out of the horse. "Some of them. They're both trying to fool one another into chasing the wrong one." "Which is who?" said Sophie. "No idea," said the horse. Some of the onlookers found the monsters too terrifying. Many went home. Others jumped down into the rolling ships to fend them off from the quay. Sophie and Michael joined the hard core of watchers who set off through the streets of Port Haven after the monsters. First they followed the river of seawater, then huge wet paw prints, and finally white gouges and scratches, where the claws of the creatures had dug into the stone of the street. These led everyone out of the back of the town to the marshes where Sophie and Michael had chased the shooting star. By this time, all 6 creatures were bounding black dots, vanishing into the flat distance. The crowd spread out into a ragged line on the bank, staring, hoping for more, and afraid of what they might see. After a while, no one could see anything but empty marsh. Nothing happened. Quite a few people were turning away to leave, when of course everyone else shouted, "Look!" A ball of pale fire rolled lazily up in the distance. It must have been enormous. The bang that went with it only reached the watchers when the fireball had become a spreading tower of smoke. The line of people all winced at the blunt thunder of it. They watched the smoke spread until it became part of the mist on the marshes. They went on watching after that, but there was simply peace and silence. It is kinda Narnia-ish at this point. The wind rattled the marsh weeds, and birds began to dare to cry again. "I reckon they must have done for one another," people said. The crowd gradually split into separate figures, hurrying away to jobs they had left half done. Sophie and Michael waited until the very last, when it was clear that it was indeed all over. Then they turned slowly back into Port Haven. Neither of them felt like speaking. Only the dog-man seemed happy. He sauntered beside them so friskly that Sophie was sure he had thought Howl was done for. He was so pleased with life that when they turned into the street where Howl's house was, and there happened to be a stray cat crossing the road, the dog-man uttered a joyful bark and galloped after it. He chased it with a dash and a skitter straight to the castle doorstep, where it turned and glared. "Get off," it mewed. "This is all I needed." The dog backed away, looking ashamed. Michael clattered up to the door. "Howl!" he shouted. The cat shrank to kitten size and looked very sorry for itself. "And you both look ridiculous," it said. "Open the door, I'm exhausted." Sophie opened the door and the cat crawled inside. The cat crawled to the hearth, where Calcifer was down to the merest blue flicker, and with an effort got its front paws up onto the chair seat. There it grew rather slowly into Howl, bent double. "Did you kill the witch?" Michael said eagerly, taking off his cloak and becoming himself again. "No," said Howl. He turned round and flopped into the chair, where he lay looking very tired indeed. "All that on top of a cold," he croaked. "Sophie, for pity's sake, take off that horrible red beard and find the bottle of brandy in the closet. Unless you've drunk it or turned it into turpentine, of course." Sophie took off her cloak and found the brandy and a glass. Howl drank one glass off as if it were water. Then he poured out a second glass, and instead of drinking it, he dripped it carefully on Calcifer. Calcifer flared and sizzled and seemed to revive a little. Howl poured a third glass and lay back, sipping it. "Don't stand staring at me," he said. "I don't know who won. The witch is mighty hard to come at. She relies mostly on her fire demon and stays behind out of the trouble. But I think we gave her something to think about, eh, Calcifer?" "It's old," Calcifer said in a weak fizzle from under his logs. "I'm stronger, but it knows things I never thought of. She's had it 100 years. And it's half killed me." He fizzled a bit, then climbed further out of his logs to grumble. "You might have warned me." "I did, you old fraud," Howl said wearily. "You know everything I know." Howl sat sipping brandy while Michael found bread and sausage for them to eat. Food revived them all, except perhaps the dog-man, who seemed subdued now that Howl was back after all. Calcifer began to burn up and look his usual blue self. "This won't do," Howl said. He hauled himself to his feet. "Look sharp, Michael. The witch knows we're in Port Haven. We're not only going to have to move the castle and the Kingsbury entrance now. I shall have to transfer Calcifer to the house that goes with the hat shop." The dogman's an interesting character. Yeah, we'll have to see what happens with him. "Move me?" Calcifer crackled. He was azure with apprehension. "That's right," said Howl. "You have a choice between market chipping or the witch. Don't go and be difficult." "Curses!" wailed Calcifer, and dived to the bottom of the grate. Alright, that is the end of chapter 16. We will pause there for today. Now, the dogman's a fun character, and it's very interesting what happens to him. You'll enjoy it. Go watch the other chapters if you're interested in the story, because it's kind of fun, or just continue from here. That's also good too. Hopefully you can hear me over the helicopter. It needs to go away. This is the problem with filming outdoors. Alrighty, my dears. It was great chatting with you, and I will catch you later, okay?